Hello everyone, back to today's second video. We're doing the GWV Sunday Round Up for today's second video. We're going to have a look at various things like sea surface temperature anomalies, solar activity, and what's happening in the stratosphere. We'll also have a look at the weather for the next week's 10 days as well. Still on a knife edge with the chance of this cold weather, although I think the models have shifted more towards the Atlantic, actually, over the past couple of days. But I'll bring you up to date with everything that's happening there towards the latter stages of the video. Just say, last night there was a problem with my antivirus software, Malwarebytes. They sent through an update that was corrupted and caused a huge memory leak on not just my machine but on everybody's machines that got this update, which rendered my computer unable to use it. It rendered it totally incapacitated for about 6 or 7 hours, and the upshot was that I couldn't get the ENSO update to you that you was expecting last night. So sorry about that. If you was waiting to see what's happening with El Nino and La Nina, we will touch on it in the Sunday Roundup, but you was waiting for that first ENSO update of 2018. That's why it didn't appear on my YouTube channel and on GWV. I'll try and get that update to you in the next day or so. I'm going to re-record it because, of course, it was going to be released on Saturday night, and I pre-recorded it. And it was talking about the weekend forecast just being issued and all that sort of thing, which will be totally irrelevant if I post it now. So basically, I've got to re-record the ENSO update, which will take me a day or so, and then I'll get that to you. Certainly before the end of the month, I'll get you January's ENSO update up and running. But it wasn't my fault. It was down to Malwarebytes, so any complaints should go to them. And I can assure you there are a lot of people very upset and annoyed about this, and I think Malwarebytes' email inbox is going to be rather busy in the next few days. So with all of that explained, let's get on with the GWV Sunday Roundup. We're going to begin by having a look at the oceans. This is the sea surface temperature anomaly map that we used last week for last week's Sunday Roundup. The 3 areas that we're interested in specifically being the equatorial Pacific Ocean just here. That's the ENSO region, of course. Then we've got the Northern Pacific up here, and then we've got the Atlantic over here. Let's have a look at the latest, and this is it. This is all coming from NOAA, by the way, NOAA, the official forecasting agency of the United States. So in terms of ENSO, no changes over the past week, and as I say, I will get that ENSO update to you in the next day or so, but essentially we keep those cold blue colours through the equatorial Pacific. We have kept them over the past week. No real changes there, maybe a slight weakening ever so slightly, but essentially we are still in sort of weak La Nina conditions. Up in the Northern Pacific, let's just go back, take a look at last week, so maybe slightly colder up here in the northern part of the Pacific Ocean, although not really much in it. And then in the Atlantic, again, no real changes happening there. Most of the Atlantic Ocean is generally significantly warmer than average. 2 areas are a little bit cooler, one to the south of Greenland. And this area just here off the coast of Africa is quite interesting. It's a little bit colder than average there. If that was to continue and expand and sort of intensify through into the spring and summer, that will probably have a dampening effect on this year's hurricane season. But it's very, very early for that. It's only January. Those are fairly shallow waters towards the coast of Africa as well, so they are subject to quite vigorous temperature changes. And it may well be that by the summer that's gone and we have some much warmer than average sea surface temperature anomalies. It's too early really to say whether that would impact the hurricane season or not. Solar activity next. So this solar disk on outside of this day from solarham.net, and the solar disk is spotless as it has been now for quite a few days actually. This is the GWV Sunday Round Up solar activity tracker, just sent through to me this morning by our good friend James Ackwell, who keeps this updated for us every week. So this is tracking daily sunspot activity back to last year, back to the spring. We can go back to the March of 2017 with that. This is where we are right now. You'll see this, or maybe it's a little bit difficult to make out, but that orange line just there flatlining is telling us that we've had around a week now of completely spotless conditions. So quite a run now of days coming out spotless, although that did happen back in November as well. But it is enough to start moving down the trend lines. The thick green and the thick red lines are heading further down. They're already at a very low level anyway. You can see that just there. So we are very quickly heading towards solar minimum. But this past week, the spotless conditions on the sun has been enough to start moving down the trend lines even further, telling us that we are currently having a further weakening of solar activity. Essentially what's going to happen as we reach solar minimum is that we're going to get more and more days that have no sunspots. So eventually we'll start to string together not just a week, but several weeks, if not months, of days where we don't have any sunspots whatsoever. And at that point, we will be at true solar minimum. And then, of course, we'll start to move on into the next solar cycle number 25. If you find all this stuff interesting, then actually we're going to have Solar Sunday coming up for you 2 weeks today. So put that in your diary if you are interested in all of this solar activity type stuff. Then Solar Sunday, the first Solar Sunday since August last year, will be with you 2 weeks today. But certainly at a very, very minimal level now of solar activity. In terms of what's happening in the stratosphere, this is the temperature at 30 HPA from the JMA, and we can see that we're still quite cold actually. So the grey line here is the trend line for the time of year. The black line is sort of the temperatures for this season. We can go back to September just there, and round average then it's close to the grey line. But you'll see what happened through the early part of January is that we had this massive drop in the temperature, went very cold in terms of the temperature at 30 HPA. Then we lifted it up a little bit a few days ago, but now we're back a little bit colder than average, and generally this is turning out to be quite a cold winter in terms of the stratospheric temperatures over the North Pole. When you have a cold stratosphere, it's enhancing the polar vortex, and so a cold stratosphere tends to go along with an increase in the westerlies through the Atlantic and into Europe as well. Go a bit higher up to 10 HPA, and it's the same story really. So again, the black line here is where we've been with the temperatures at 10 HPA this season. The grey line is the trend. You'll see we went very cold with those temperatures at 10 HPA over North Pole at the end of December into January. Then it warmed up a little bit, but now it's turning really cold once again. So certainly no sign of the stratospheric warming, and no sign of a sudden stratospheric warming at all. If we had that, we'd take this black line and push it up rather like that. They look very, very dramatic when they occur, but it hasn't happened yet. It's getting very late in the day now for that. We wasn't expecting to get a sudden stratospheric warming this winter due to being in the easterly QBO and various other factors that we discussed in the winter updates. We was expecting a sudden stratospheric warming. We may well still get one, but now, because it's getting so late into the season, because there's always a time lag on this having an effect on the troposphere. So what happens off on a bit of a tangent, really. But what happens with a southern stratospheric warming is that you'll get the warming in the stratosphere, then it'll gradually propagate itself down into the troposphere, where over a period of days or weeks, it will set up an area of high pressure in the troposphere over the North Pole, and that high pressure will eventually become a blocking feature that will push the cold out of the pole into mid-latitude. That's the theory behind the southern stratospheric warming. There is a time delay on all of that happening, though. So from getting the warming to getting the effect in the troposphere, it can be sort of a few weeks. So let's say we have a southern stratospheric warming at some point through February. The impacts of that will then be more expected to be felt in March or possibly even April. If we get a southern stratospheric warming in March, say we get it at the beginning of March, the effects of that would be more into April or even late stages of April, you see what I mean? So if we leave it much later to get a southern stratospheric warming, it will affect the spring rather than the winter. I think we will still get a big warming event at some point before this season is over and done with, but its effects may finish up being felt more in the spring than in the winter if we leave it too much later. Let's have a look at what the GFS is forecasting for the temperature in the stratosphere at 10 HPA. So we're starting off here on the 28th of January. Quite a warming is taking place at the moment across Siberia, but actually over the pole itself, we've got these blue colours, which are the cold temperatures in the stratosphere at that upper level of the atmosphere. What happens as we run through is that we keep further warming going across Russia and Siberia, again trying to push it into the pole, but still keeping those blue colours centred over the pole, really. And then as we go through into the extended range of the GFS, that warming over Russia and Siberia sort of fades out. But we do have another go at starting to lift the temperature up around sort of the northern Atlantic and Greenland area. Quite a minor warming on this run of the GFS, but the earlier run, the midnight run, actually intensified that into quite a significant warming around Greenland right at the very end of the run. This gone to the 13th of January, 13th of February, I should say. So again, bear in mind there will be a time lag, so if we was to get a big warming sometime around middle of February, its effects might not be felt really until we get into the early or middle stages of March. So we certainly can't leave it too much later, this warming, if we are going to get it to have an impact on the winter. Anyway, we'll keep looking at the stratospheric temperature, but it is going to be a bit of a disappointing season, I think, stratospherically compared to what we expected to happen. This is from the University of Berlin website. This is showing the ECMWF forecast for the stratosphere, again at 10 HPA. You can see where the actual North Pole of the Northern Hemisphere is on this chart. It's where this black cross is just there. So this is for 168 hours, a week away, taking us to the 3rd of February. Again, very similar to what the GFS is showing. We have got some warming across sort of Russia and Siberia, but over the North Pole itself, it's quite cold still. We can go to day 10, 240 hours away, and that warming over Russia and Siberia is intensifying Ben quite a lot. So it is becoming quite an intense warming at day 10, which is the 6th of February, but not really penetrating into the pole still. The actual North Pole, where that black cross is, still looking really quite cold with those temperatures at 10 HPA. If we could run another day or two, it would be interesting to see what would happen, because I think that's more of an intense warming that we have there over Russia by day 10, what the ECMWF is showing. In fact, let's go back to the ECMWF and see what it shows for day 10. So that's the day 10 chart, and it doesn't really show much of a warming at all at that point over Russia. It's fading that warming out by day 10. So definitely the ECMWF is more intense with that warming that's happening over Russia at day 10. And whether it would move on another day or so, if we could move on another day or so, whether that would develop into a proper stratospheric warming, really is quite impossible to say. But solar fluxes are coming down. This is, again, from the University of Berlin website. This is depicting the zonal wind at 1 HPA, right at the very top level of the stratosphere. You see that earlier in the season, this is sort of November to December just here, had quite weak zonal winds. But in the latter stages of December, it all changed around Christmas, just before Christmas. Had that real mild outbreak just before Christmas. And that's when the zonal wind lifted up to a very strong level, and it stayed there really into January. Later on, it has dropped a little bit, the zonal wind, but still relatively strong. The forecast from the ECMWF is to weaken those zonal winds further, so we should start to see the zonal winds easing off as we head in towards the start of February. Actually going to a lower point than where we was back here in November. So that is an indication that the polar vortex and the zonal winds across the northern hemisphere may be starting to weaken a little bit as we're heading towards February. They normally do anyway, just cyclically, really, because as you get through to the latter part of the winter, what tends to happen is that you lose a temperature gradient between the pole and the tropics somewhat, and so the zonal winds will tend to ease anyway. Maybe a response to that warming of the stratosphere over Siberia and Russia, I'm not sure about that, but certainly signs that the zonal winds are going to continue to decrease as we go through to the start of February. This is the Arctic Oscillation observed and forecast chart. So the black line here is telling us where we've been with the AO. The red line's at the end where the GFS ensembles are forecasting the Arctic Oscillation to go. Remember, this is just an index that's reflecting the state of the atmosphere over North Pole. It's not driving anything. Just tells you what the atmosphere is doing. When the Arctic Oscillation is positive, you'll have low pressure up over the pole, and so consequently you'll keep the cold air bottled up in the pole generally, and you'll strengthen the westerlies through the mid-latitudes, and particularly through the Atlantic and Europe. When the Arctic Oscillation is negative, you'll start to increase high pressure over the pole. You'll start getting blocking, and blocking can be the route to pushing cold air out of the pole down into mid-latitudes. This is where we are right now with the Arctic Oscillation, just on the positive side of neutral. GFS ensembles forecasting the Arctic Oscillation to go quite negative, though, through the early part of February. Again, dates on the bottom of the chart as you are looking at it. Been an interesting winter this, because generally the Arctic Oscillation has been in a fairly negative phase. We've had a few positive episodes, that one again just before Christmas, and then again around the middle of January, and again where we are right now we're a little bit positive. But overall, going back to November, the Arctic Oscillation has tended to be in rather a negative state, and certainly the GFS ensembles are forecasting that to continue into February. But look what's happened with the North Atlantic Oscillation, being very much in its positive state and remains so. So again, this is just an index that's reflecting the state of the atmosphere, this time looking at the Northern Atlantic as opposed to the Arctic. When the NAO is positive, you'll have low pressure strengthened around Iceland and high pressure strengthened around the Azores, and so that will increase westerly flow. Conversely, when the NAO is negative, you'll have high pressure around Iceland, low pressure around the Azores, and that's one of the colder signals for us, because that high pressure around Iceland, especially if it ties back to blocking in the Arctic, will push cold air down into the mid-latitudes. So essentially a negative NAO is a signal for a cold winter period, positive NAO is a signal for a mild winter period. And around November, the NAO was actually in its negative phase, but from almost the very first day of December, we've gradually been trending more and more positive. You'll see how this black line has very gradually, over the course of winter, been lifting up. So around the middle of January, it went very positive with the NAO. Then it dropped a little bit, but then it rose back up again, and that's where we are right now, still very much within the positive phase of the North Atlantic Oscillation, and GFS ensembles are forecasting us to stay in the positive phase of the NAO through to the early part of February. So the two indexes have been out of sync with one another all winter. The AO has generally been in a negative phase, the NAO has generally been in a positive phase, and a strengthening positive phase as well. It's got stronger, this positive period of the NAO as we've gone through the winter. These indexes typically move in blocks of 3 or 4, 2 or 3 months, sometimes up to 4 months. You would expect the NAO to start to move back in towards a negative phase before too much longer. It's been quite a long run that it's been going on since, you can see, since the start of December. Been in its positive phase. You would expect this to begin to start to drop into a more negative period before too much longer, but I suppose what could happen is that we might get the LEO going more towards a negative phase, and we might then start to see the AO beginning to shift towards its positive phase, and if that was to happen, then we would struggle to get cold conditions out of the pole and down into Europe as well. But it's certainly been an interesting winter. How these two indexes have been out of sync with one another. And that explains, or at least partly explains, why it's been such a difficult winter to forecast. These are the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles for the next couple of weeks. The red line here is the 30-year upper air temperature average. Very mild today. It really is going to be a really mild day. Temperatures are going to be into the mid-teens Celsius. So we could well get 14, 15 degrees today, which is sort of like the temperature you would expect in April rather than January, so a proper taste of spring out there. But things are going to be turning cooler over the coming weeks, so by the end of the week we are actually going colder than average around the middle of the week to the end of the week. Excuse me, it is going to be a little bit colder than average, and then after that we go through this first week of February. That's this period just here, and there is still so much scatter in this period. So we still have several ensemble members that are looking mild, several ensemble members that are still looking cold, and it's just a real mess actually through this early part of February. And I think what explains it, why it's so difficult this period, is that we have got a signal for high pressure to be forming around Scandinavia and to the north and northeast of the British Isles, but at the same time the Atlantic onslaught still wants to continue. So you've got the irresistible force against the immovable object, and that's what's causing all of the confusion. Generally you would tend to favour the Atlantic winning out, and I think that this way models have shifted a little bit over the last day or two, but there is still quite significant cold potential there within the GFS ensembles for the second half, or I should say for the first to the second week of February. In terms of precipitation, quite a lot of dry weather coming up over the next few days, but then precipitation spikes are coming back through the early part of February. So it's either going to be mild and wet or cold and wet by the look of that. Temperature anomalies are looking like this. This taking us from the 28th of January through to the 5th of February, coming out milder than average through most parts of the continent, most parts of Europe, British Isles included. Turning colder, though, you'll notice, over Scandinavia. Precipitation anomalies from the 28th of January to 5th of February, generally a little bit wetter than average for much of the UK, particularly central and northern parts. It is a bit drier than average down to the southwest. You'll notice turning drier over northern Scandinavia, that's depicting a Scandinavian high trying to get going and bringing that very cold weather in. So let's finish off having a look at some of the model runs. This is the GFS midnight run, and I'll show you the very latest, the 6 o'clock run. So we start off with a midnight run with low pressure just to our east, high pressure out to west, and bringing down this cold northerly wind. Through the middle part of the week, there is a little bit of wintry potential, especially for northern areas. Doesn't last long though. Wind backs into the west by Friday, and we're pushing milder air through, and then we go into next weekend and another low pressure zips across the country, that perhaps bringing gale force winds and a renewed push of quite cold air from the north. So that is turning things a bit colder again next weekend, with perhaps some more wintry potential for northern parts of the country. Then we try to build up this little transient ridge and do try to get some high pressure going over Scandinavia, but look at this these purple colours around Greenland. That's a strengthening of the polar vortex there becoming really intense with PV, just at the same time as high pressure is trying to build over Scandinavia. But with such an intense polar vortex that we see there, it's going to be very, very difficult to sustain any high pressure over Scandinavia. And so as we get to day 10, we just run the Atlantic through. It turns really quite stormy, and it's also fairly cold as well, but it's cold from the North Atlantic. It isn't cold from Scandinavia and the Arctic. So this is back to sort of cold zonality, which we've had quite a lot of this winter. This is bringing gale force winds, heavy rain, and probably then snow to northern parts of the country, with these deep areas of low pressure running into the second week of February. This is the 6 o'clock run of the GFS. So, again, around the middle part of this week, it is going to be turning colder. We get the wind into the north, just temporarily, and there might be a little bit of wintry potential. Friday brings another low pressure across the country, back bringing wet and windy weather. And then a little bit different with the 6 o'clock run of the GFS, in that we tried to build a ridge over the country next weekend. So low pressure still coming in off the Atlantic, but it is being blocked as a ridge is trying to build again. It is trying to get going over Scandinavia, and this low pressure actually moves to our south. What happens is that a high pressure does build over Scandinavia and gets the wind into the east as well, and that continues into next week. So this takes us to Tuesday the 6th, when we are pulling in quite a cold easterly wind. We're getting up towards day 10, and that's how things looking at day 10. High pressure is in over Scandinavia, but again, we've got these deep pink and purple colours over Greenland, indicating that the polar vortex is strengthening. Looks like the days of that Scandinavian high are quite numbered, but look how much cold air there is to our east. We're very, very close there to bringing in potentially quite a severe spell of easterly winds. It's only, we'll only take very slight adjustments to pull in that severely cold air that is sitting across much of central, northern and eastern Europe. But what happens actually is that because the polar vortex is strengthening around Greenland, that high pressure just can't sustain itself over Scandinavia, and it just is quickly broken down by this low pressure coming in from the Atlantic. And actually, we don't get those bitterly cold easterly winds. We just bring in a milder sort of southwesterly flow. Finally, the ECWF. So again, around the middle of the week, we get a little bit of a cold snap coming through from the north or the northwest. We go up to the end of the week, still looking unsettled. Low pressure coming in off the Atlantic. This low pressure coming through next weekend is diving southwards. So again, similar to what 6 o'clock GFS is showing, this does pull in some quite cold east to northeasterly winds just briefly by Monday the 5th of February, just beyond a week away. We are pulling in these colder northeasterly winds, and then the high pressure is attempting to build over Scandinavia. That's how we finish up on day 10. That really is a battle type situation, really messy. We've got a ridge over Scandinavia, albeit a fairly weak one. We've got the Azores high down here, and then we've got all of these pink and purple colours up here, which is of course the polar vortex. So we're trying to bring westerly winds in that way. We're trying to keep us in an easterly wind from there, and that's a proper battle type situation. If we run on another day or so, I suspect we will find the Atlantic rolls in and breaks down any attempt at the ridge over Scandinavia. But what we need to factor in with this is that if these models are just overdoing this signal for the PV to strengthen, let's go back to it. So that's how things are looking at day 10 on the 6 o'clock run of the GFS. This is how things are looking at day 10 on the midnight run of the GFS, just a little bit before day 10. If these models are overdoing this, these cold temperatures that we've got around Greenland and the intensity of this low pressure, if they're overdoing it just ever so slightly, then the Scandinavian high will be able to take over and get us into that east wind. Once you get into it, it can last much longer then. It's always, the problem, as I always explain with these types of situations, is actually getting into the block pattern in the first place. Once you get into it, you can lock in, and then you'll go off and running potentially to quite a prolonged cold spell. But the problem is always trying to get the ridge to build and then to lock it into place. And we see a classic example of that with these runs of the models. So tentatively, we have backed away from a severely cold easterly wind through the first half of February. But if the models are overplaying the Atlantic a little bit, just ever so slightly, then it will take just slight adjustments to place us back into potentially a very cold east wind, because we are going to have a big cold pool plunging into much of Central and Northern Europe, just whether the Atlantic allows us to tap into that or not. Right, so that's brought you up to date with everything. I forgot to mention at the start of the video, when I had my rant about malware bites, that earlier on today we released the second season model roundup of the spring of 2018. That's getting something like 10 long-range models together, see what we're all showing for the spring. The video is here on the homepage. Just scroll down the page a little bit and you'll be able to find that above the stow desk. Later on today, that will be placed on the spring updates forecast page with an extensive written summary. As I say, I will try and get the ENSO update, but I wasn't able to bring you last night. I will try to get that up to you in the next day or so. This evening we might go through the GFS ensembles just to see what they're all showing individually, see how many of them want to bring in easterly winds, because from the mess on the ensemble graph that we just looked at, wasn't really able to decipher much. So let's go through the GFS ensembles for the early part of February and see what they're all showing. That'll probably be with you around 7 o'clock this evening, as long as I don't have any more problems with my software. Right, so half an hour, very extended Sunday round today. That's all for now, and thanks for watching.